What is a comparable? You know, if you're an appraiser or an aspiring appraiser or even a user of appraisal services, you've probably been asked that question or thought about that a little bit. And what is a comparable or comparable? What makes something comparable? For purposes of this conversation, I'm gonna intertwine the term a competitive property also as a comparable property. Okay. If we really want to dig really deep, we could make an argument that there's a difference. You know, you may have a property that might be comparable that's not really competitive, but I don't want to dive that deep, right? Most appraisers and most users of appraisal services use those terms synonymously. And so we're going to use that synonymously, if I could say that, for this podcast. So what is a comp? And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I was looking over an appraisal report and I saw a statement, and I'm just going to read a little snippet from it to you. And I want you to think about it for a minute. So I'm gonna jump way over here. I apologize. I hope you can hear me. So here we go. There are 65 comparable properties currently offered for sale in the subject's neighborhood, ranging from a price of $330,000 to $5,490,000. Hello. $330,000 all the way up to $5,490,000. The report also states that there are 44 comparable sales in the subject's neighborhood within the past 12 months, ranging from a sale price of $152,000 to $2,195,000. Let's just round. $150,000 to $2.2 million. I just want you to think about that for a minute. Are you comfortable putting that in your report? Should you put that in your report? Well, we can't look just about price. I get it. Let's come back and have a conversation about what is a comparable. Hi, this is Bryan Reynolds. You're listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast, brought to you as always by the great folks over at Appraiser eLearning. You need some education? Come check us out over at appraiserelearning.com. You'll see a whole list of our upcoming classes in the virtual classroom, and man, those have really taken off. People tend to really like those. I've got some classes coming up. I haven't been teaching for a little bit, but I'm coming back. So jump over to appraiserelearning.com. You can click on the calendar. You can see some of our upcoming classes. And of course, we always have our offerings online that you can take at a self-pace. We'll be offering some pre-conference education at our next appraisal conference, partnered up with NAA at the ACTS conference coming up really soon in San Antonio. Hope to see you there. I think Hal and I are co-teaching a class on the new appraisal report, you know, the UAD stuff. So you probably don't want to miss that. Sign up now. But let's dive into this for just a minute, okay? And I want to read you a couple of textbooks, okay? So I like to go to authoritative sources, and so let's go to a few, all right? Here's one. It is the Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, published by the Appraisal Institute. And if you don't have this book, I recommend you get it. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, all right? So let me look. Comparables. A shortened term for similar property sales, rentals, or operating expenses used in the comparison in the valuation process. In best usage, the thing being compared should be specified. In other words, are you looking at comparable sales or comparable rentals or comparable listings, et cetera, comparable rents, that type of thing. And there's some others in there, comparable analysis, competitive stuff. You might take a look at that. The next one I'm going to read is The Language of Real Estate. And I like this little book. It's an easy opening book. And by the way, maybe we'll have another conversation real soon about what is an arm's length transaction. people think different things on that. And so maybe put your comments down here. Let me know what you think is an arm's length transaction, and maybe we'll do another podcast on that very soon. But let me read you what this one says. Comparables are properties that have been recently sold or leased and are similar to the subject property. Sale prices of these properties are used to estimate a value, develop an opinion, I like to say, for the subject property. Comparable properties need not be identical to the subject, but should be similar and relatively easy to adjust for those differences in order to arrive at an indicated value for the subject after adjustments. Also called comparable sales, comparable properties, comps. We refer to them as comps a lot, right? Here's another book. This is a little older, Real Estate Appraisal Terminology. This is by the American Institute of Real Estate Appraisers and Society of Real Estate Appraisers. And what does it say? Shoot, I thought I had it turned and ready to go. It got away from me, but here we go. Comparables. An abbreviation for comparable sales, an abbreviation for comparable property sales, rentals, incomes, etc., used for purposes of comparison in the appraisal process. Barron's Dictionary of Real Estate Terms. And by the way, how many dictionaries do you have in your library? Do you have any? You might want to scoop up a couple. Comparables, comparable sales, properties that are similar to the one being sold or appraised. Here's an example. A subject property is a detached 3-bedroom house that's 30 years old and will be bought with an FHA loan. Comparables would be recently sold houses with similar styling, age, location, and financing. Slight variations in characteristics may be taken into account when making the analysis. Don't know if I 100% agree with any of these, but at least we're on a roll. Lastly, I'm going to pull up the Encyclopedia of Real Estate Appraisal. It's a great big old book, as you can see, and I hope I've got this marked so that I don't waste your time. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I like this one. And so this has a whole big section on it. But I highlighted one little part in this book because I like it. What is a comparable property? It is one that would be a reasonable alternative for most prospective buyers who would be interested in the subject property. I want you to listen to that one because it's very simple and it invokes some good common sense. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that's your sharpest tool as an appraiser is good judgment. I mean, we've got to analyze data. We got to collect data. We got to verify data. You can run regression. You can use all these fancy tools that you want. But at the end of the day, I believe the sharpest tool that you have in your appraiser toolbox is good judgment. Let's read this again. What is a comparable property? It is one that would be a reasonable alternative for most prospective buyers who would be interested in the subject property. So I know I've done a podcast on, appraising a log home and what if you don't have any comps, right? And when we did that, we broke down, what creates value? And guys, you use these economic influences every single day in your appraisal practice. You might not be able to recite them off the cuff, which you should be able to, but you use them every day. And so I want you to think about that for a minute, alternative property. It really does just boil down to what other properties would be in a competitive state for the same buyers as the subject property. And let's think about what creates value for a minute. There's 4 economic influences that a thing must possess in order to have value. Scarcity, right? There's not one on every corner. There's a limited supply. Why are diamonds so valuable? In part because of their scarcity. Utility. Don't show me a 2-bedroom house if I need a 4-bedroom house. I'll fire you on the spot. It doesn't meet my utility. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Desire. I know people don't like that word anymore, but it is a component. If you want to say demand, change the word to demand. I don't care. But if you don't like it, if you don't want it, you're not going to buy it. And then finally, purchasing power. You've got to have cash or cash equivalency to acquire something. So let's put ourselves in the buyer's shoes for a minute. Okay? The only thing we have to worry about the seller is that the seller is well informed, they're acting in their own best interest, and they're not under any duress. From that point, we forget about or set the seller aside. Value is achieved through the eyes of the typical buyer. Okay? What are they going to do with that property? Let me give an example. I need a light industrial building in your town. Okay? I need 3,000 square feet on 2 acres of land. I'm moving my workforce and my company to your backyard. So find me this building. I need 3,000 square feet on 2 acres. I'd like to buy it for less than $2 million if I can. $2 million is my budget. Okay, go find it. Could you find that in your market? Possibly. Let's pretend you can. And you call me up and you're like, Bryan, I'm pay dirt here, buddy. I found your light industrial building. It's 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet. It's on 2 acres. Actually, it's on 4 acres. Is that okay? Yeah. That exceeds my minimum requirement. I'll take that. Sure. And it's not $2 million. It's $1.5 million. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm excited. Where do I sign? I'm coming to your office. I got my pen ready. I'm ready to sign that contract. I'm going to buy it. And I come over to your office and you give me the contract, or you introduce me to the real estate agent that you've recommended to me to use, whichever the case. They put the contract in front of me, and as I'm signing my name, I'm like, I'm so excited about this. I'll take you boys out to dinner and buy you a nice steak and buy you a bourbon. I'm just curious. I just have one question. This is great. Can't wait to move my workforce here. I'm just curious, when can I take occupancy? At closing, or 30 days, or when do I get occupancy? And they're like, oh, Bryan, wait. That property is under a 20-year lease. I'd fire you on the spot. If I'm the type of buyer that is buying that property as an owner-user, I'm not looking for something that's encumbered with a 20-year lease. I want something I can move my workforce in. Okay, that would probably be better for an owner-investor, right? Someone looking for that return, for that lease, that long-term lease. The property has to truly compete with the subject property. So if the subject property was for sale and you were the typical buyer of that property, it's got the number of bedrooms you want, the number of bathrooms you want, it's in the location you want, it's got the acreage you want, you really, really love it. So there's a scarcity, it meets your utility, you desire it, and you got the money to buy this one. Pretend for a minute you knock on the door and you're ready to buy that property, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, we've decided to keep the house. That's the one I wanted. That meets my utility. I desire it. I've got the money. There's scarcity. What other property would you consider, or the typical buyer consider, as a substitute property for that one? That is the comparable. So let me ask you a question. Do you think a typical buyer of a house that's priced $330,000 if it suddenly was no longer available, that they would go down the street or 2 blocks over and consider a $5,490,000 property as a substitute property? Yes or no? That's going to be hard for this old Kentucky boy to swallow that pill, ladies and gentlemen, because I don't think the typical buyer of that $330,000 house would have the purchasing power to buy a $5.4 million property. Do you? And if we flip that equation, the typical buyer of a $5.4 million property, should it suddenly become unavailable, would they consider the $330,000 property for sale as a substitute property? I mean, they certainly can afford it if they could afford a $5.4 million, but it probably doesn't meet their utility. It's probably not as big. They probably don't desire it. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it's highly improbable. Listen to what I'm about to say. I think this is a very fair statement. Someone taught me this many years ago. I wish I could take credit for it. Some people live in houses because they want to. Some people live in houses because they have to. And that's not a mean statement. It's a true statement. It equates to me. I want the $5.4 million house on the Gulf. That's what I want. I can't afford that. So some people live in houses because they want to. Some people live in houses because they have to. I can't live in that $5.4 million house that I want to because I can't afford it. It meets my utility. It exceeds my utility. I desire it. I'm slobbering over it. Scarcity is there. That's the only one. What's my problem? My problem is number 4. I don't have that purchasing power. When you're doing your appraisal and you're doing a pre-printed form that asks you how many comparables are in the area in the last 12 months, how many are listings, they use that word comparable. So they're not asking for the universe of sales. They're not asking for the universe of listings. They're asking for comparable. And if you truly believe in your heart and with your analysis, yeah, Bryan, in this case, it's a quirky market, and, somebody that can buy a $5.4 million house very well may take the $330,000 house as a substitute property. Okay. Be prepared to answer those hard questions if you're asked those questions. Be prepared to have support for that opinion. Good judgment is your sharpest tool. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're making some money. Hope you're staying safe out there. Take a little bit mini vacation. I think I've got one, a surprise one for me, which will be great. A little recharge. I can use it. If you'd like to be a guest on the program, I've got a couple of guests coming that I think you're going to be really, really interested in. I can't wait to get them on. We had some scheduling issues, so it's going to be just a tad bit longer. But if you'd like to be a guest, or if you know someone you feel that would be a great guest on the Appraisal Update Podcast, reach out to anybody over at Appraiser eLearning, and we could certainly make that happen. I hope to see you in San Antonio. Please come up and say hi, shake me, introduce yourself, grab Hal, grab Kim, grab Jim, Ben, any of the team members. We love to meet appraisers, working appraisers. I am a working appraiser. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast. Until next time, I'm Bryan Reynolds, your host. Happy appraising.
The Appraisal Update Podcast is brought to you by Appraiser eLearning.